Hey everyone, welcome back to Continuous Thunder. I'm finally back. I took a little bit of a break there after, listening to over 600 albums over the course of 6 months. You kind of get a little burned out, and it was nice just to take a little break and to relax just a bit and not have the pressure of this channel looming over my head, even though I only put out one video a week. Yeah, so much pressure. But anyway, speaking of relaxing, today we are talking about a fine practitioner of relaxing music, and that of course is Tycho. And today we're talking about his 5th album, which is now out, called Weather. Tycho is an electronic music project from Scott Hansen, and it's a little difficult to categorize his music. He's often categorized in ambient, but me personally, I'm not too comfortable calling his music ambient. There's a little bit too much going on in there for me to comfortably call it ambient music, but it is some pretty laid back, pretty relaxing electronic music. He also incorporates live instruments like guitars, basses, and drums, but it is definitely within the electronic realm still. And pretty much the unifying theme across all of his work is that it's pretty chill. In fact, Tycho for me is kind of difficult to review because his music is pretty inoffensive. If you like it, you like it. Pretty much the only consistent criticism for his entire discography has been that it's not actually all that challenging. It's good music for the background, for doing other things, but it happens to still have a few good little nuance nuggets for those of us who like to listen a little more actively from time to time. Like I said before, this album is Tycho's 5th album, but it's also his first in a couple regards. First, it's the first album that he has released since concluding his Dive trilogy, made up of his albums Dive, Awake, and Epoch. Second, it's his first album on Mom and Pop and Ninja Tune Records. And third and finally, and perhaps most importantly, this is the first album where lyrics and vocals take a very prominent role in the album. 5 out of the 8 tracks on Weather feature lyrics and vocals written and performed by Saint and Sinner. And this is one little point that I am going to make right now while I'm talking about it. I really feel like this album should be marketed as a collaboration between Tycho and Saint Sinner. And I think that for a couple reasons. And one of them is because of the inclusion of her vocals, this album does sound quite a bit different from everything else that Tycho has done. And the contribution that she gives is more than just providing her vocals. Tycho did not write the lyrics to this album, at least as far as I can tell whenever I'm reading notes on it. A lot of the notes for like the lyrical themes and everything seem to come from Saint Sinner's own experiences. So that tells me that she wrote a good bit of them herself. And it's also the fact that she is the only vocal contributor on this album. So why it's marketed as just a Tycho album, I'm not entirely sure. It's not necessarily a knock against it, just kind of a little nitpicky thing for me. I really think she should get a lot more credit than she's getting on the front billing of this album. And while we're talking about Saint Sinner's vocals, I just want to make sure to say that this is not just her singing verses over your typical Tycho instrumentals. The way that her vocals are worked into these tracks shows that this truly was a collaboration. Some tracks like Japan and Skate even pull the instrumentals way back so that the vocals have their own space, truly treating these more like vocal electropop songs than your typical chill Tycho tracks. And like I said, these lyrics do seem to come from a place of being written by Saint and Sinner. These are not just generic lyrics put over these tracks. These clearly come from personal experiences, particularly revolving around past relationships that she was a part of. However, while these lyrics are a nice addition to Tycho's sound, some of the lyrics leave a little bit to be desired. Generally on these tracks, the same verse is repeated instead of having 2 distinctly separate verses with different lyrics. And one song in particular, called For How Long, gets very highly repetitive and kind of monotonous and drags that track down a bit. For those who aren't completely ready to accept Tycho with lyrics, there are 3 instrumental tracks on this album. They are very strategically placed at the very beginning, in the middle, and at the very end of the album. And if I'm completely honest, I believe that these are some of the best and most interesting instrumental tracks that Tycho has made in a few years. I wish I could go on a bit more about it, but the album itself actually isn't very long. It's 8 tracks in just under half an hour, so I'm just going to get straight to the score. Overall, I give it a 4 out of 5. Like I said before, Tycho's music is typically pretty inoffensive, and he's been a pretty solid 3 or 3.5 out of 5 artist for me. The change up with this album, adding vocals and lyrics and showcasing his compositional skills in the way that he's able to incorporate these into his typical sound, just kind of shows us that Tycho can do more than just one thing with the Tycho project. Along with that, like I said, the instrumental tracks on here are some of the best that he's made recently, and all of that put together gives this album a little bit of a bump up to a 4. For this week's recommendation, I don't have a whole lot of albums to give you. I only really have one, but that's just because it's an album that I kind of wanted to do a full review for, but I was having a little trouble fleshing out an entire review for it. And that is the self-titled release from a band called Squares. Now, this album is a collection of unreleased demos that were recorded by a band in the early 80s featuring Joe Satriani on guitar. Yes, Surfing with the Alien Joe Satriani, Satch Boogie Joe Satriani, guitar teacher to Steve Vai and Kirk Hammett Joe Satriani is in this band, and this is what he was doing before he released his debut album. Now, fans of Satch know that he can hold it down in a band context pretty well because of his work with Chickenfoot with Sammy Hagar, Michael Anthony, and Chad Smith. However, I personally believe his band dynamic skills are on greater display with these demos right here. This band is power pop with heavy influence from rock and roll of the 50s and 60s, with a little bit of a punk edge in the instrumentals, definitely not in the lyrics. By Satch's own admission, their sound was pretty hard to nail down in the early 80s, and it's probably the reason why they didn't make it farther than they did. However, Joe says that the experiences that he had with Squares helped him meet the people that would be instrumental in helping him launch his solo career in 1986. Were the Squares ahead of their time, or did they really just not have what it takes to make it back in the early 80s? I don't know, but I'll let you decide. However, if you're a fan of Joe Satriani, you really don't want to miss this. But that's going to do it for this round of Continuous Thunder. Thank you so much for watching, and I'd like to know your thoughts. Did you listen to this album? Did you like it? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? You can go ahead and leave those thoughts down in the comments. Go ahead and also tell me if you think adding vocals and lyrics to Tycho is a good idea or a bad one. You can also leave suggestions for the next thing that I should review. Quick reminder that there are links down in the description, not only to the Tycho album, but also to the Squares album. You can also follow this channel on Instagram and Twitter at CT Music Review. Those handles are on the screen, and there will also be links down in the description. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.